Today, so I want to get started and move through these quick. Yeah, thanks everyone for sending games in, and thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciate it, and yeah, I think we can get right started. Cool. So this is Joseph Bento's game against Blue Mamba. I think I'm not basically early bishop's opening e6. I was thinking about this opening. So in the bishop's opening, so e4, c5, bishop to c4. One of the things about this opening that's kind of interesting is basically bishop c4 is an aggressive attacking move. It focuses on the a2 to g8 diagonal, and is overall solid. It basically is a good diagonal for the bishop. The issue is in the Sicilian game, it runs into e6 relatively quickly. So when white plays bishop to c4, black plays e6, and the eval is relatively close to equality already, unfortunately. That said, I think you can play it. I think you need to follow it up with moves like f4, f5, and you need to get started on an idea to break open this diagonal for the bishop, because there are issues that occur with d5 being played early against an early bishop to c4. But yeah, let's see. So bishop a2, okay. So the bishop is committed to this diagonal. It's a good diagonal, but f4, f5 needs to be the follow-up. g6, knight f3, d6, castles, bishop g7. And overall here, I think, white's gonna have good opportunities on the king side. It's gonna be kind of an, it's an interesting Sicilian, actually. Basically, black has started off with, a lot of pawn moves, and the ability to expand on the queen side. It's a completely closed Sicilian, so that's probably the most interesting part of this situation. Hey, welcome, K-Clan, how are you? Welcome. So basically, I'm just looking at this situation, and what's really interesting about this position is that it's led to an extremely closed, a closed situation. That's pretty much, I guess that's what I would consider to be like the biggest determinant of this, of this opening. But basically, these pawns like this should run into, yeah, thank you. No, it's a good morning. I just got back from a nice bike ride, and yeah, ready to do some chess. But yeah, so yeah, the main thing about this position is this a2 to g8 diagonal is one that can be valuable to the bishop. But this is an unusual situation. I'm kind of curious in terms of opening theory how this normally goes, but it's really interesting. By the time that b5 is played, this is no longer in the opening book. White technically leads in development. He has this one exposed bishop diagonal, but this is pretty wild, actually. Not a position that I'm super familiar with, and just one to think about. Where do you assemble a plan? There's not really, much opening on the queen side, and the normal Sicilian attack on the king side is probably the correct one. But I think h4, g4 is probably your best path forward as white. But actually, it's a really interesting situation. It's rare to see a Sicilian opening that's this closed. I would have considered f4 here. Knight f3 sort of, basically a resource that you're really going to need is f4, f5. Because otherwise this diagonal is going to be not particularly useful to this bishop. So I think f4 before knight to f3 is probably the idea. There's other ways, even after knight f3, I'm sure there are ways that you can sort of get f4 to be played. But basically, there's a big positional thing going here. Hey, welcome, Kiro and Limestone. Thanks for being here. Yeah, but the main point is your bishop is developed, which is good, and it's on this a2 to g8 diagonal. But I think what's kind of interesting is this. Basically this f4, f5 is needed to break this diagonal back open. Otherwise, this bishop's going to basically be stuck, basically right now, the bishop only has these two squares available for it, which is too bad because it's a good diagonal for the bishop in general. So f4, f5, I think is probably the way to go. Anyways, castles, bishop g7, knight d7, and I think white's looking fairly good. Potential strategies here: bishop f4 could be good, pressure on d6, knight d2, bishop e7. Overall, here I think white's kind of developing a reasonable looking attack. I think the best played here is like h3, knight h2, knight g4, but overall, it's really a very interesting position because black has played in such the Sicilian in such a closed way. Um, uh, well, that's great. Good to hear, Kiro. Glad to hear that. Yeah, glad to hear that you're headed. You're improving. Good work. I can't take credit for any of that. It's it's all you and studying the right material. But uh, yeah, good stuff. Good to hear, Kiro. I mean, to be fair, you were playing pretty well before. Like when we played Kiro, you almost beat me like one of the games. I you know, I think I think you have a lot of room for improvement, Kiro. To be completely honest, I think if you stick with the tactical training and kind of get your game to be more, basically to be extremely accurate, I think you're gonna be in pretty good shape. But that's great, Kiro. I'm really happy to hear that. Um, So yeah, in this situation, the pieces that I'm sort of curious about, uh, I'm actually really this whole opening is actually really interesting. So bishop to c4, is a good diagonal for the bishop, but not as good if the e6 and d5 can be played by black. Um, but the way that black plays this, and the way that this opening is structured. It's like a closed dragon basically. You have the g7 bishop able to be fianchettoed, and you have these pawns expanding on the queen side. So that's sort of what I'm thinking in terms of basically expansions for white. White's always going to have to be careful because black is fairly well advanced in his queenside expansion. He doesn't have the normal open rook file, but he could use queen b6 to support a push on b4, and that could potentially be a good thing for black. Anyways, bishop f4, queen b6, knight d2, and overall, here I think you can push things forward with h4, h5, h6, and some good pressure. Good basically pressure being exerted on the king side. There is a little bit of an interesting situation tactically here where I think that there might be ways to attack against a disorganized queen side. Here I think you can do things like knight to b3, d4, those types of general plays, but the queen side expansion, this game is sort of following the normal Sicilian plan, where white is basically getting, attacking on the king side, and white's attacking on the queen side. And ideas like, f4, knight g3, h4 are going to be the best offensive resources for white. So in terms of theme, this is actually sort of consistent with the Sicilian opening. I mean, it's an extremely closed Sicilian with, a very well expanded pawn structure for black, but it ends up at the end of the day being a kingside attack for white and a queenside attack for black. So that's normally how the Sicilian goes, really. Here, d4, queen c2, pawn takes. I think overall this is just going to be good for white. Knight to c5 is good. Rook e2, sure. But now you're in sort of a more equalized position. Let's think about what I think. Basically, things are going very well for white as of an earlier point. Let's think of where there might be a tactical improvement for white. Maybe d4. But I think, yeah, you play d4. I like d4. d4 I think was a good play for white here. Might as well. Although the issue is with knight to c4. But yeah, I like d4. It's a good play for the center. I guess the main here was the main issue. So the issue here was queen to c2. This shifts the eval by about 2.2, yeah. So I think that this is an error. I think the correct move is queen takes c or queen to c1. Um, no, all right. I guess I was wrong. So okay, so the best play for white is pawn takes c5. I guess that makes sense. This trades off the queens. Knight takes d2, pawn takes b6. So overall, I think this ends up being good for white. But interesting. So yeah, so I like d4, but the follow-up move on d4 is pawn takes c5, and trading off the queens. The fact that you can take the pawn with this attacking tempo is really what's important about this. So this is just a tactical play. Not an easy one to see. I didn't see it at first, but yeah. So pawn takes c5 here, and you're attacking the queen, and you end up a pawn in that exchange because this knight can't take another piece in follow up. So the options here: pawn takes queen somewhere, queen gets out of the knight threat. Otherwise, pawn takes c5, rook takes c5, bishop takes c5, and the queen's still getting threatened. Or the best move, knight takes d2, pawn takes b6, and white is actually completely fine here. The best move here was queen to c6, I guess. But yeah, this was the correct tactical play. There are issues here that occur, like queen c1 I thought was fine, but here knight takes c3, queen takes c3, pawn takes, queen takes, probably. Queen takes or pawn takes. But either of these is going to be good for black and relatively equalizing. So, you've basically gotten in a situation where you have, equal minor pieces. And on queen to c2, black can trade for this bishop on e3. Basically trade this knight for this bishop and have the better minor piece. The better way to go is to just not trade off at all and to take this pawn with tempo. This wins a full pawn for white and is a tactical improvement. So yeah, interesting. Cool. Here I think you're in a relatively equal endgame. Black has a better minor piece, but white has a connected passed pawn. So overall, I'd say white's white's about equal here. After trading the rook, white's given the edge. I don't know. I think queen e6 could be played here too. It's really, yeah, it's a question, basically, yeah, white got a good tactic. Good idea. So king g8, king f7 was a big blunder. Basically, anything else here I think is fine, like knight, queen f7, it's a pretty quiet move, probably fine. But overall, I sort of generally am liking white's position here. This pawn's likely to, this pawn's likely to advance and has good queening chances. It's a, basically connected passed pawn. So overall, good for white. Going back to the beginning of the game, so the first thing is, I'm not sure bishop c4 can be played in the Sicilian, to be honest. This equalizes for black. It'll lead to a lot of interesting situations, but bishop c4 in the Sicilian, it can be played in the Sicilian, but it usually comes after e5. The fact that bishop c4 can be met with an early e6 is problematic for white. If e6 is played here, you can do things like, knight c3, but the issue is that this bishop's going to be kind of launched on an inferior diagonal for a long time. It's a good diagonal in general, but if e6 is played, this bishop sort of loses a lot of its mobility on that diagonal. Now, basically, if the bishop had been on e2, it has more opportunities than on the c4 diagonal with e6 having been played. If you really do want to play the bishop c4 in the Sicilian, it tends to be most common in Sicilian lines that are like knight c3, close Sicilian with knight c3 and f4. What's important about the f4 resource is f4, f5 will open up this diagonal. You can use f4, f5 to open up the diagonal and line on f7. This bishop's on a good diagonal, but if it's not on an open diagonal, you need to work to open it up with f4, f5, and then basically on pawn takes, then you'll have this open diagonal again. But this this diagonal is just kind of problematic. It's technically a long diagonal, but e6 forms a very solid way of blocking it off for white. Um, Other things here. Once this is done, this development looks pretty solid. And yeah, I think white's in pretty good shape. Um, this was a tactical miss. Bishop can take e6 here and solve a lot of its problems. So bishop takes e6 was hanging. This is the first improvement. Yeah, one or two move tactical ideas I think are important to see. So recommend tactics training to, you know, tactics training will be very helpful. It's helpful to all of us. But on f6, bishop to e6 was hanging, and this also solves your problem with that problematic diagonal. So that was open for a move, and then black sees d5. Okay, pawn takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, and now you've actually solved your issue with this this bishop. But the main point is, I think that bishop on that weakened diagonal was kind of an avoidable issue. It's just generally not that good in the Sicilian on that diagonal, and you did a good job turning it into kind of a closed Sicilian where it had opportunities to break through. But the important part of that bishop to c4 is to break through with f4, f5. You need some way of activating the bishop on the diagonal you've placed it on, and f4, f5 tends to be the resource for white. Hey, welcome, Coach. Thank you for joining the stream. Your game's coming up for sure. It's in the, I think, 4th or 5th slot for today. But yeah, thanks for being here, Coach. So f4, f5 is a kind of a necessary set of moves that I think is good for white with the bishop placed on the c4 diagonal in the Sicilian. You just need to come up with some way of getting around that e6. Not so easy, but kind of necessary in order to reclaim that diagonal for the light-scored bishop. d4, knight c4 is good. I liked d4. I thought d4 made intuitive sense. I think white needs to kind of challenge the center here, so good call. And then the tactical follow-up on knight to c4. This is another just one move tactic. Pawn takes c5, and this queen on b6 is hanging, and getting attacked. So you need to find some way of basically this tactic was there, and knight, basically calculating out knight takes, pawn takes is important. So pawn takes b6, yeah, queen c2, pawn takes, queen f2, yeah, generally I think this is just good for good for white. This connected pass pawn should provide a lot of compensation for white here. We'll go through it, but so far the improvements that I see are two tactical ones. Bishop e6 was hanging for a move, and pawn takes c5 was the tactical play here. Knight takes, knight c5, yeah. Here, bishop to e3, okay, sure. But I would still take white's side of this. Black has the better minor piece, but I think that white's going to have an opportunity to, white's going to have an opportunity to basically, advance this deep pawn safely. Here I'd probably play queen f1 and rook to e1, but it's up to it's up to white. I'm just looking at the various tactics here. Black probably does better not simplifying. I think black's best idea here is probably to play f5. Here I would play, or f4, sorry. This can get a little bit tangled, but I think that making advancements on the king side here might be a good idea for black. The engine is pushing for a4. Here a4 and then queen e2. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Woe. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining the stream. So a4 I think is the is getting basically advocated for both white and black here. So rook e1, bishop d2, bishop to a6, and I think white's looking pretty good. Yeah. But yeah. So, Rook D1 I think is good. Uh, so A4, A4 is what the engine is saying play as white. I'm not entirely following why this A diagonal is so important to both sides here. This will take me a second, but let's figure this out. I think what it is, okay, so here's what I think, here's the reasoning behind why I think A4 is important. I think basically A4 provides an opportunity for white to, basically advance here. So say A4. This provides an opportunity for white to create an open file on which his rook is already placed. And on the black side, the reason why A4 is important is basically just to prevent that white idea. Here, black has an open rook file. That's one of the key advantages of his position. So getting a similarly opened rook file for white equalizes a characteristic where black is currently winning. So that's why A4 is probably better than, rook to E1. But yeah, I would say A4 here. A4 and things should be fine. But anyways, this overall I think is, it's going to be an interesting endgame where black has the better minor piece and white has this connected pass pawn. But I like white's position here. And then in the very end, you get a great tactic and win. So awesome, cool. Being able to play knight g5 with check is a great opportunity for white. So overall, in terms of coming up with improvements, the first one I would say, so first is a broad concept. Consider whether bishop c4 is a good idea in the Sicilian, or a good, idea for you to be playing in the Sicilian. Whether it's an opening move that you like. If it is, then I think what you need to do is you need to play knight c3 and then f4 and f5. Running this bishop on this closed diagonal is not good for white. This bishop is relatively immobile here. It would even be more mobile on the e2 square. In this case, when e6 has been played. So in order to break that up, you need to play f4, f5. Now, this bishop is committed to some, a diagonal that's relatively close to it. In terms of advancing this, I think your opportunities, basically you're playing solidly. I think white plays a good game, but see two one-move tactics. So the first thing to consider is whether bishop c4 and how to play, or whether bishop c4 is the right thing to play in the Sicilian, and then if it is the right thing to play in the Sicilian, how to improve it. And the answer to that, I think, is to play f4, f5, reopening the a2, g8 diagonal for the light-squared bishop. And then the second thing is there's two tactical opportunities for white here. Bishop takes e6 was available for white here, and I think white would see it. If you take the position, if you were just shown this position and you didn't have the game context around it, I'm pretty sure that you would find bishop takes e6, which solves the rough diagonal problem and wins an exchange for white. After d4, there's another opportunity, another one-move tactic. It's pawn takes c5. This wins a pawn and trades queens, and that's another one-move tactic. So that that's another opportunity there. After this, I really like the way that white plays. The only thing that the engine finds that I wouldn't have even thought of is a4. A4 here allows white an opportunity to break open the rook's file, and get more mobility for this rook, which isn't doing much for the situation. You play rook to e1, which I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're basically trying to match this rook, but match this rook on the open file. But the actual better play here was a4. This way, the rook gets the open file, and also with the rook getting, it's basically equalizing. The method that was used in this game to equalize the rooks was e1 versus e8. The way to equalize the rooks that the engine recommends is not to match the rook on the e file, but to create your own open A file for the rook to attack on. That's the improvement that the engine finds. I wouldn't have found that. I was surprised and took me a second to figure out why I was recommending it. But this is an objective improvement. Matching this open file rook versus this open file rook is an improvement that the engine finds and ends up being helpful for white. Anyways, you close it out with a great tactic. So so overall, interesting game. We never really got to see the value of this advanced or of this connected passed pawn, but anyways, very interesting game. The recommendation, I think like everyone here, I recommend doing tactics. The tactics routine that I do is basically the tactics routine that I do and that I recommend is basically doing an hour to 2 hours of tactics a day for a month on a tactics trainer of your choice. So if you have chess.com, you can do chess.com puzzle battle, chess.com puzzle rush. If you want, chess tempo is also an option that doesn't require a premium membership. And there's a program called CT-ART, which was the one that I used when I was improving out of class level. And that program is really good. CT-ART is a good standalone program. I've gotten a lot of use out of it, and I think Lichess may also have a free chess tempo. But yeah, CT. Thank you, call me coach. But yeah, CT-ART is great. I don't know. You might even be able to find very old versions online. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but anyways, the CT-ART, I just know from personal experience. That's how I got from like 1200 to 2000. And Lichess also I know works well. So really anything. But my routine, but I think something that will really help is do an hour to 2 hours of tactics a day on whatever tactics trainer you're most comfortable with. I think having an untimed tactics trainer and a speed chess tactics trainer, probably the mix is the best option. But overall, that's what I'd recommend. If you do that, I think the moves like bishop takes e6 in this game and moves like pawn takes c5 in this game, which were kind of key opportunities, would be, you'd see them a lot more easily. So anyways, I think that's really interesting. I think you played a good game. I thought this thematic concept of, basically in this situation, don't match the rook with the rook to e1. Instead, match the rook with a4, and you get this open file. That was a big part of this. That was a big part of this game. It wasn't super intuitive to me. But basically, match the match this rook with that rook, not by moving it to the e file, but by moving it to the a file, or opening up the a file. That's my argument there, and that I think is that's your play, in that situation. But tactics training is the overall best route forward for you. I think it's the best route forward for probably anybody under about 2000, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. But I think it'll be really helpful. You'd be surprised if you do the tactics trainer for an hour to 2 hours a day for a month. It will absolutely improve your game. There's just no way that it wouldn't. It'll just really help your vision. So anyways, I've done it myself. I think all masters have done it at some point in time. But I think that will be helpful. Thank you very much for sending the game, and please keep sending them. I really appreciate you sending the game in, and feel free to send more in the future. All right, London system, awesome. London system I really like. London system is basically objectively shown to be one of the best best openings for white at this point. Computer analysis shows that it leads to a small but lasting advantage, so it's objectively one of the strongest openings. I strongly welcome, Wo. Yeah, should be good. But yeah, so this bishop f4 is going to be strong on this diagonal. Bishop f4, London system, I think is probably one of the forward-looking best openings. Queen to d2 seems a bit inefficient. I don't know how much I like queen to d2 here. I would just play straightforward developing moves. The thing about knight queen to d2 that's fine in this situation is basically it's not constricting your development. A queen d2 earlier would block in this bishop and cause unnatural development. Here, I think, yeah, no problem. No problem, Wo. Yeah, it's interesting. You're bringing up a really good point. I was thinking I might move, to maybe 3. So I'm gonna make some changes. Yeah, feel free to send as many as you like. Or if you're not into sending games, you can also send in ideas for lessons. But yeah, one of the things that I was thinking of, so one of the things is starting Saturday. So today is Thursday, so Friday is going to have the same schedule. But starting Saturday, I'm going to try a different schedule for the stream. I'm going to do a schedule where we're having, a stream at 8 a.m. Eastern, so in the morning, and a stream at 9:35 p.m. Eastern at night. And I think that the combination of those two should be. I think that change will be helpful. I've been doing, I've been taking classes, so the original schedule was based off of a class that finished. But I think that 8 a.m. and 9:35 p.m. Eastern might be a good idea for the schedule going forward. I was also thinking of changing to more instructional content. So you're making a good point, Wo. Like, I was thinking that maybe we'll do it as like 3 lessons and then 3 games. Because right now, basically, what we're doing is about 1 lesson and 5 games. But I was thinking of changing the ratio so that it's 3 lessons and 3 games. So, anyways, but it's interesting that you say that, Wo, because I'm very happy to hear that, because that makes me feel better about showing as many games as we do. But I was thinking 3 lessons and 3 games as the yeah, well, I mean, honestly, you can just post an idea for a lesson either on the stream chat or I don't know. Do you have access to the Discord? You have access to the Discord? Yep. So you can put it in there. The Discord link I've got, it's here. Okay, cool. Yeah, so if you go to the game submission section, feel free to send either a game or an idea for a lesson, and we'll get to it. The next open slots are on the 22nd, so only 2 days from now. But it'll be on the stream 2 days from now if you send either a game or an idea for a lesson. But yeah, I was thinking we might move more towards like 3 lessons and 3 games instead of 1 lesson and 5 games. Because I'm happy to hear that people get something out of looking at other people's games, but I think general lessons are probably more applicable to everybody all the time. So yeah, anyways, London system, cool, good stuff. London system's always a solid opening. I would never oh, sorry, yeah. No, you can send idea. Sorry, my I should speak more clearly and get a better audio system. But yeah, idea. So if you want to take a look at a particular opening or a particular end game, then yeah, feel free. Just send it in the game submission section, and we'll get to it within a day or two usually. So yeah, if you want to take, look. Yesterday we looked at the note boom variation of the Queen's Gambit. I usually get about a puzzle battle. I get somewhere between 30 and 40. It depends on how hard they are, and it depends and sometimes I mess up and lose earlier than that. But I would say on average more than 30, somewhere between 30 and 40. That's a pretty wide range, but 30 and 40. So yeah, so this is yes. So I would say spending more time on tactics versus amount of tactics. But yeah. Overall, this ends up being an interesting idea. London system gives white a very solid opportunity, and you can basically start doing attacks on the king side fairly early. I think h5 here is good. H5, g takes h5 looks good for white. I think e4, bishop d3, that ends up being a good way to play. But yeah, I like the launching. You know, you have a solid position here. Your pieces are generally pretty well developed. This bishop's maybe a little bit underdeveloped, but everything's looking fine. Overall here, I just say that your situation is just very solid, so you can start pushing h5. Nah, sorry, it would be looked at on the 22nd. I'm trying pretty hard to keep the order because I tell everybody you know, I tell everybody what slot. So if you sent a game right this minute, Dark Slide, it would be the morning of May 22nd. But yeah, good question. So e3 advances the development of the bishop, but here is one of the rare situations where I think you might want to play anti-fundamental moves. h5 is just very strong. h5, knight takes h5, and then g4 causes major problems for black. You know, basically knight f6, queen to h6, g5 would get a pretty big problem on the black king side. But anyways, yeah, castles, bishop takes g7, king g7, e3. The issue with e3 is it closes a key attacking diagonal. Yeah, so the file opening helps out a lot for sure. But I think that having this open file for the queen is very important to this attack. Things like h4 or things like e4, bishop d3, h5. I think that's going to be very important for white in this game. So I think if you're going to try to open up the bishop's diagonal, I might go with e5 as opposed to e3, or sorry, e4 as opposed to e3. This keeps this long diagonal open, and then the bishop can develop to d3. So the issue was, so it's not that, so first you have this tactical opportunity, h5 breaking open the king side, cool. But the thing about that is a better opportunity for white is e4, which has many of the same benefits, but without the disadvantage of closing this dark squared file for the queen. The dark squared file for the queen is very valuable to white here. Here h5 happens, but now because the queen can't get involved in the attack, it's not as powerful as it would have been otherwise. Yeah, so white's, I think, in pretty good shape. Cool. Okay, interesting. All right, interesting. So it turns into a one-pawn endgame for white. But in terms of misstepping in this opening, London system is good. I can't say anything bad about the London system. The London system with knight to c3 is kind of interesting. But I guess the main move that I would avoid is I wouldn't play queen to d2. I don't really think that. I think basically here knight f3, bishop to d3, bishop to c4, knight to d2. That ends up being a you know, that basically ends up being a lot better way to play this as white. Just stick with straightforward development. Queen d2 is somewhat anti-fundamental. If you play fundamental developing moves like knight f3, e3, bishop to c4, knight c3, that's just going to be better for white overall. You can then play queen to d2, but in terms of you know, in terms of just getting your pieces developed as quickly as possible, I think that's a higher priority than playing queen to d2. We're still actually in the opening book here, which is kind of interesting. H4 is interesting. The engine is suggesting e4, and the opening book is suggesting e4. I think this is probably right. You know, you've sort of transposed this into a you know, a center opening versus a flank opening here, and with that, you know, establishing this big center and space, you know, basically center control and space advantage in the center. That's better than playing h4, h5, I think. So yeah, that's my thought on that. Bishop h6, bishop takes g7. This ends up being, you know, pretty solid for, you know, this ends up being relatively solid for black. So in terms of takeaways from this game, I just want to go through quickly. Basically, this is modern defense. I wouldn't play queen to d2. Queen to d2 looks interesting, but it doesn't really fit on a fundamental level. I think knight to f3, e3, c4, knight c3 are better. And here, what I would do is, bishop takes e4, sure, so in terms of moves to revise here, London system is good. Queen to d2 is anti-fundamental, so I would advise against queen to d2. It might actually even fail our criteria testing. So actually, I came up with this criteria, which I think is a pretty good one, which is if there's a move in the opening that involves a switch of more than 0.5 against you. So if you're looking at an opening move and you're assessing moves for your opening repertoire, you're assessing basically the first best move versus the second best move. And here, queen to d2 is 0.28 worse than 0.27. So 0.28 worse than 0.27, and basically the criteria had been plus 0.5. So if it's a difference of between the first and second of plus 0.5, then hey, welcome DJ Salchicha. Your game's up this morning as well. So queen d2 versus e4 is a difference of plus 0.28. And the difference between and basically the percentage of time that it's played is less than 1%. So the criteria we were using was difference of 0.5 and difference of less than 1% played, and it was subject to removal from opening repertoire. I thought that was pretty safe. I thought it screened out most kind of questionable openings. So yeah, knight to c3 is fine. And here, you're in an interesting situation. Usually the answer is just ignore it, to be honest. It is annoying. That is an annoying threat that you can do sometimes. That battery can be dangerous. But usually the answer to that question is to let the queen, or let the bishop sit on h6 for as long as it wants to, and if it plays bishop takes g7, you play king takes g7. You drop the bishop back to h8. That can work too, but usually that bishop's not important enough. If white's able to, you're making a good point, Call Me Coach. So Call Me Coach says, cool. Yeah, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, always feel free to watch the video on demand. Honestly, the VOD is always they should be up forever on YouTube. So always feel free. But yeah, my advice, so both Call Me Coach is right in some situations, but sometimes you just let the bishop sit on h6. Basically, if the bishop has to move to h6, white's using so if it's bishop h6 attacking a bishop on g7, white has to play the bishop developed to so in total that's 3 moves for the bishop, right? So in order to get the queen behind the bishop has to develop to an initial square. So the bishop has to go to somewhere between d2 and e3 or f4 at g5 in order to set up that battery. So that's move 1 for the bishop. Then the queen goes behind it to set up the battery, so the queen usually moves to d2, supporting a bishop on e3 or g5. And then the bishop has to play a second move to h6, and then it has to play a third move to take your bishop on g7. So usually the lost tempo of the bishop that white's just going to trade off on g7 isn't worth it for white. It can provide attacking chances sometimes, and sometimes, it can be paired with h4, h5 to create a good attack. But often bishop h6 is not really that strong a move because the bishop can just leave it alone. And unless the h-file is open so that queen h6 is a threat, like defended by the rook, for example, that battery isn't actually as strong as it appears to be. You can usually just leave it alone. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Or sometimes if you really need the bishop on a fianchetto, you can play it bishop to h8 if you really need that bishop. But it's rare to need the bishop to that degree. that it's actually worth expending the tempo moving it to h8. But it can happen. Anyways, queen d2. I think you should. So in takeaways from this game, queen d2 I think is slower than knight f3. So queen d2 basically is a slower development move. Castling is fine, and overall, yeah, I guess I would say here just leave this leave this diagonal open. So e4 is a move here that advances your your situation, with trades on e4 being possible. But anyways, so just front to back, queen d2, evaluate whether that's the best opening move in the London. Play e4 instead of e3 here, or at least keep your your dark square diagonal open for the queen. This is a key offensive resource for white. Otherwise, I thought the attack seemed reasonable. It would be better if the queen was able to attack in this situation, but that's okay. And then overall, queen f8 allows f3, right? So f3 here, bishop f5, g4, and the bishop's forced to retreat. And yeah, overall, I think white's just looking pretty solid. Rook moves so queen's on c6, rook moves to c8. G5 provides an opportunity to really create a spatial disadvantage for black. So I don't know. I mean, white just basically traded into a winning knight and pawn endgame. It all makes sense for white, really. So the things that I would look at in this game: queen d2 is an anti-fundamental move, not a bad move, but an anti-fundamental move. So consider whether developing with knight f3 or e3, or taking even more center control with c4 might be a better play. Okay. The second one is e4 versus versus e3. This is probably the biggest positional difference for the game. You're starting an attack on the king side. You need to keep these diagonals as open as possible. This is probably the biggest adjustment that I'd make. Really consider how to get all of your pieces and maintain your pieces access to your attacking position. Cutting your queen, which could be a key potential piece, off from an attack that you're trying to get started is a positional error. So e4 here, if you want to develop that bishop. You can also just play h5 probably, and not involve the bishop in this attack, but cutting the queen off from this attack is a positional mistake. Overall, I think this is just generally pretty good for white. White's up a pawn here and has a more active, has center control and a good rook. A good rook supporting a pawn on an open file. So I just like white's position. I don't think there's many errors. I think actually, I think white played a very solid endgame. Like, trading off the rooks was a good idea. Trading off the knights was a great idea. And then white just trades off into a winning pawn endgame where he's up pawns. It makes complete sense. The things that I would focus on this game are, really be conscious of if you're launching an attack, make sure that your heaviest pieces are involved. Here, the queen to h6 is going to be a crucial piece of this. With h5, you cause all sorts of problems, partially because queen h6 is a resource that's available. Yeah, basically knight e4, knight takes, and h5 here. Is a good idea to be attacking on the king side, but it loses some of it. It loses a lot of its potency because that queen can't get involved. I'd focus mainly on this position, and I'd consider the conceptual idea of involving all of your pieces on h6. That's my idea for white, and I think that that's the biggest piece of advice that I'd give you on this game. Overall, very strongly played game. I thought you got a good a good general play there. Everything made sense. You did a great job converting the late middle game into a winning end game. So nice work on that. And yeah, just the trade-offs I think are a good idea. Makes a lot of sense. Seems strong for white, and yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for sending the game. I hope that's helpful. And yeah, look at E3 and Queen D2. Those paired together kind of point to you've moved Queen D2 to start the attack with the Queen, so you want to hold on to the Queen's ability to attack on the King side. That's my advice there. I hope that's helpful. Thank you very much for sending the game. Please keep sending them, and yeah, I really appreciate it. All right, here's Julio Calcina's game. I've got it right here, and he is next. Cool. Black is playing. Okay, so interesting. All right, Scandinavian. The Scandinavian's a good opening. I like the Scandinavian, actually. I think it's, it may not be the most popular game played at Grandmaster level, but Magnus Carlsen has played Scandinavian with 3 Queen D8. I think objectively speaking, it's really a fine opening. This is a line that's interesting, and I don't know this gambit. I don't think it's particularly bad for black. I think this could be fine. But I don't know it, so we'll take a look. This is an interesting idea for black. I don't even play the knight f6 Scandinavian. I play the queen takes d5 Scandinavian. The Scandinavian that I like to play is just very solid. Knight c3, queen d6, c6. That's the way that, every person has their own biases in how they play. My position was always just, be fundamentally stronger. So, get really, really good at tactics, get really good at positional play, make those two biggest priorities, and then just get to an equal position in the early middle game. That was always sort of my thinking. But there's that's a stylistic thing. If you enjoy playing gambits, then there are definitely some good gambits to be playing. Queen's Gambit is fine as white, although that's may or may not be an actual gambit. But here, you're in an interesting situation. What is c6 useful for? I guess the point is that it allows black to develop with tempo here. Maybe. I'm not a I'm just not a gambit player. I don't necessarily think this is particularly bad for black, but oh, what is c6 useful for? Good question. Yeah, preventing d5 and preventing b5. It goes like this. So e4, d5, pawn takes, queen takes, knight c3, queen to c6. And then problematic things can happen within very early knight to b5. So that's the main thinking. I would say tactics-based at the end of the day. I think I'm stronger tactically than I am positionally. But it's really a game very much about... My game personally is just really about having very strong fundamentals. That's the goal. I try to develop quickly. I feel like going from 2000 to 2200 was about developing positional play. Getting to 2000, I think I was very heavily tactically focused. I still think I'm very heavily tactically focused, but bringing in a better positional understanding and understanding of development and pawn structures has been my improvement from 2000 to 2200, 2250. But yeah, I think that's the style that I always thought was the most effective. I'm not big on opening theory. It's been very helpful for me to go through a lot of opening theory recently. But yeah, I'm mainly focused on fundamentals. Heavy opening preparation's not where I have spent a lot of time. So yeah, so here, why is c6 useful? C6 is useful for preventing knight to b5. There are threats that can be formed with g3, bishop g2, and from bishop to g2 to a8 potentially. There's threats here. Here I think c6 makes a little. It looks visually like a more intuitive move. It can prevent d5, b5, and diagonal shots from the bishop from g2 to a8. That's mainly why I play c6 here. So yeah, that's the line. This game continues with ideas like knight f3, bishop g4, knight f6, and knight d7. On bishop f4 threats into the queen, you played a queen b4. There's some kind of prepared lines there. With bishop f4, you play queen b4. Anyways, c6. I don't know. I mean, it's a gambit. I guess it could be valuable in terms of establishing more open lines for the rook on the c file. But overall, I'm just, look here. Here's the key position. And let's use the same criteria that we always use. So I think Julio, this criteria is helpful, and I think this may be helpful in screening out some openings. I'm advocating using the criteria if the best opening versus the opening that you play. If your opening move relative to the computer determined best opening move is a more than 0.5 difference, is criteria 1. And if it's played less than 1% of the time as criteria 2, then it's something that you should probably take out of your opening book. I think this move might fail that test, so let's just compare. So the best opening move here for black is knight takes d5. The difference between knight takes d5, this is plus 0.39, and this is plus 0.77. So, okay, it might be fine. Let's just think of other potential opening moves. Like let's say g6. How does that eval? G6 is bad. Bishop f5 is probably bad. So okay, all right. I'll say c6. It is played. The thing about c6 is that it's played 3 out of 1,200 games, so it's played about once out of every 400 times. I hate to dismiss opening moves because they're not played frequently, but you should at least consider the popularity of an opening move when playing it. There's a reason why, in 99.5% of games, knight takes d5 is played. Not saying that you can't find great things in uncommonly played opening moves, but there's usually a reason. So this this breakdown of opening moves I would pay attention to. Anyways, c6 is played, knight takes c6, and then basically opportunities for white. a6, bishop takes, pawn takes, castles, e6. And here the issue is just this eval difference is too big. It's moves like bishop d6, threats on h2, moves like bishop to g4, and overall I think that black's position here is fairly good. White's position here is fairly good. Like, this opening or this gambit hasn't really shown to provide you any reasonable advantage. I think that you're playing another opening that's just very uncommonly played. And I think that and objectively not that strong. Really pay attention to the evals when you're looking at your potential opening moves. But this c6 here, this opening breakdown is really the big thing. Like if you're looking at grandmaster games, grandmasters play knight takes d5 99.5% of the time or more. That's a pretty good indication that it's the best move. But anyways, with knight c6, we can keep looking at this. You're in a position where white's up about a pawn and a half to 2 pawns. Cool. This tactic was pretty interesting. On knight g4, this king could play to g3. Here, I think that I think basically this is good for white. This king is very exposed here, but on a bishop move you play, or on a queen move you can play like bishop to f4. So your defense for white should hold up, and you haven't lost the piece on h4. And black has no dark squared bishop to attack you with, so that's a key part of this. So going on in this game, white plays king f1, which misses the king to g3 saving defensive tactic. Yeah, bishop f5. Okay. Bishop f5 leads to yeah. All right. So let's see. Bishop to f5, queen to h4, and then you're getting some threats on this king side. The bishop is also being threatened. I guess, yeah, so actually that's right. So here there's a tactical opportunity for white. White can play queen to h4, and then this bishop is trapped on h2 because it's getting attacked by the knight on f3, and it's getting attacked by the various pieces on all of its escape squares. So that's actually a bigger problem than I thought it was. I didn't see that. But yeah, queen h4 wins the bishop. Anyways, things to improve here. Yeah, white gets a pretty good attack. And if you resign, and I guess white resigned here, or sorry, black resigned. Yeah, okay, black resigned here. So interesting. Okay. So let's take a look. In this game, I'm not sold on the opening. I have to be completely honest. Like, I just think that I'm not understanding why this pawn is getting gambited. 99.5% of games involve knight takes d5 as opposed to c6. Not saying that you should dismiss just based on that criteria, but in this case, it feels like that might be the best move. Your development is good. Here I might play e6 as opposed to a6 here. E6, is going to lead to threats on c6. But okay, a6 is fine, sure. Here, white's up like a pawn, more than a pawn. This tactic is not sound. There's the refutation of king to g3. On knight to g4, king to g3, and this defense will hold. And then there was another tactic here, queen to h4, which wins the dark squared bishop for white. Interesting. Okay, cool. So improvements for you here. This opening, it's up to you, but I wouldn't play it. It seems like one that causes some problems. And then tactically speaking, there's two unsound ideas. Bishop takes h2, loses to king to g3, and then here, queen to h4 wins the dark squared bishop, which I didn't see, to be completely honest. The other one I saw, but this one I didn't see. So I think, basically there's two major takeaways. It's an interesting game, very interesting to see a win, out of that opening. But the two pieces that I would look at are make sure that you, basically I would say, I'm just not sold on these gambits, to be completely honest. I think they're not the style that I think is objectively the best. With a gambit, you there are gambits that work, like the queen's gambit is fine as white, but this gambit I don't think shows its value relative to to just sort of solid developing play. Um, but if you like it, but if you enjoy playing it, then by all means play it. I just, objectively speaking, it's kind of it's a little bit hard to justify. Uh, then the second thing is, I think you have two tactical improvements. Basically allowing queen takes h4 here, which I didn't see, is a problem for black. If black sees queen takes h4, then black trades queens, right? Or plays rook to b4, I guess. Rook to b4 is a pretty compy looking move, but say queen takes d4, and you're basically equal. But queen to c7 loses this piece. And then the earlier tactical opportunity, which was whether or not bishop takes h2 is sound. This was also very dangerous for black. So I guess my advice here is consider the opening, and then the second piece of advice is really make sure that you really put in some time on tactical study. Sometimes even in 1 minute, moves like bishop takes h2 are playable, knowing that they're unsound. That's definitely possible. But from a long, I'm trying to treat each game like as if it's a long time control game where both players are trying to play the best moves. This is just a really risky. There are definitely times that this sacrifice is sound, but you need to have it calculated all the way through. King to g3 makes this sacrifice basically makes this sacrifice unsound. So I would definitely be sure to fully look at all of the options, look at all of white's potential defensive resources, because like knight g4, king g3, and this actually holds up just fine for white. So yeah, that's my advice. Tactical study, same tactical study as everyone else, an hour or two a day for a few months. I know you're already pretty strong, but I still think you'll see very good returns on tactical study like that. Yes, and I think basically that will be helpful in screening out these these tactical missteps. Queen h4 was super hard to see. I didn't see it, to be honest. So queen h4 here is a pretty cool tactic for white. White missed it too, so not easy to see. But yeah, queen h4 wins for white. It would be tricky to see that one, to be honest. You might see it in a slow game, but in a blitz game it would be pretty difficult too. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say, Julio. Tactical study and really consider whether those, whether it's worth accepting, objective difficulties out of openings. If something's played 99.5% of the time, unfortunately, that probably means that it's right. I don't like that either. I wish there were like hidden moves in chess where you could find things that are played 1% of the time and are really fantastic. That's not really the case that often. It's the case sometimes, and I encourage you to keep looking for those types of things. But if something's played 99.5% of the time in a frequently played opening, it's probably right, unfortunately. It sucks. I wish there was cool stuff. I wish there were cool hidden moves in chess too. But it probably means that it's right. So overall, I really like the opening. I really like the general game. I like the attacking idea. I thought that was cool. But I think you need to do. I think you need to definitely continue to make tactical study a part of your game, part of your studying routine, because I think that those dangerous. I think that's basically right, Coach. I think finding novelties is there are novelties, there are cool things, and there's cool things for interesting purposes. Like I actually there's a really cool one yesterday that we were looking at that I got stuck on, where I was looking at Alekhine's defense with knight to e4. And I know objectively this isn't really particularly good, but it is really crazy to play in 1-minute games. So, I know that this isn't a novelty that is good, but like if you're playing Bullet, this actually could be a really cool thing because White's gonna mess this up like a really good percentage of the time. So I'm actually gonna try this opening out more and more in Bullet. But there are novelties. Like this is a novelty that that someone showed in a game yesterday, and I think this could definitely be a good surprise weapon in 1-minute games. Objectively speaking, I don't think I would play it in anything longer than a 1-minute game, but this actually is a really cool idea. And I think I'm going to try it. So anyways, there are novelties, but not that many, and usually not objectively good ones. This one's only good for the specific purpose of playing in 1-minute games. But I do actually think it could be useful there. So I appreciate the new stuff, but anyways, Julio, I think that opening is questionable, and I think that I think that opening is questionable, and I think that your I think those sacrifices are dangerous. And I like them. I think that they can be great opportunities for you, but I think that they really need to be calculated out entirely. That's my take on that. But yeah, anyways, thank you for sending the game, Julio. You've got another one tonight and another one tomorrow morning. I'm super happy to look over them. But I guess those, in general are just sort of my takeaways. I think that it's just hard to be a Gambit player. It's, you can find some, and maybe, look at Grandmaster level games. I think if you're going to be a Gambit player, make sure they're ones that Grandmasters are familiar with. You can use to draw upon their games for ideas. Because, it's, for me, it's just more fun to, it's more fun to win than lose, right? I mean, so that sort of places the weight on fundamentally strong things. Not saying you have to play the objectively strongest thing if it's boring. If the top priority over winning is having fun with chess, right? But basically, I think that you can, I steer away from those Gambit openings because they're usually objectively not that strong. But it's up to you. You got to play the game that makes the most sense to you and what's fun for you. Anyways, thanks for sending the game, Julio. Looking forward to looking at your games tonight and tomorrow. Cool. So a6, knight f6, b5. All right, so we're in Ruy Lopez. Ruy Lopez with bishop e7, so closed Ruy Lopez. I play bishop to c5 here. Bishop to e7 is fine. I think this has a name. I guess it's Hungarian variation where that happens in the Italian game, but Ruy Lopez, I guess bishop e7 doesn't have a name. Okay, so this is just going to be normal mainline Ruy Lopez type stuff. Castles, d3, d6. And here, basically, white plays an unusual move. So bishop to g5 is frequent in the Ruy Lopez, but it's not frequent in the Ruy Lopez if bishop e7 has already been played. So I think that basically here, bishop to g5 is sort of inefficient. It's basically playing onto a line where white is already, white is already fine. There's not really dangerous things that are happening for black with bishop to g5. Like bishop e7 is bishop to e7 with d6 already having been played. This bishop is committed to defending on this diagonal. So attacking on a already very well defended diagonal doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for white, in my opinion. I think it's not bad. It's, developing the bishop to some diagonal, but it's just sort of why that diagonal if it's already super well defended. Bishop g4, on the other hand, I think makes complete sense, because here, basically, you see there's a big difference between these two bishop moves. Bishop g4 actually makes a legitimate threat. This sort of prompts the, defensive move knight to d2, but this bishop, this bishop being played to g5 requires no response from black. bishop h5, h6, queen d7. And overall here, I think, black's doing, black's doing fine. Bishop to, or knight to g3 looks like it hangs a piece almost. Yeah, I think it does. This is going to be very dangerous for black, but if black wants to win a piece here, he can play bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, g5, and it does win the piece. He's going to have to worry about, a lot of counterplay, and probably losing both the g and h pawns for that piece, but he's going to win a piece here, so I think that this is an opportunity for black. Black looks like, this looks pretty good. Let's see where the misstep was, but whoa, interesting. Okay. Well, let's look at this. So, why is rook to takes a5 bad? This mainly has to do with basically white's ability to get into black's position. So, superficially, like, this pawn versus this pawn, like, you're trading pawns, so it's probably okay. But the issue is, the issue here has to do with how good your opponent's entrance into your position is. Here you play king f6, and white will really have to struggle to get into your position, because it's not just that this rook takes and this knight takes. It's that there's a continuation of, there's basically a posting of this knight within black's territory. That can be avoided. It's sort of almost a spatial advantage type thing. With king to f6, you're holding this this f5 pawn. No issues here. This pawn structure is solid. You'll probably play like rook to f8 and king to e5, but I would say here that that king to f6, king e5, and rook to f8. That's probably a I think that's a better play for black. So yeah. Anyways, rook takes. It's not that the pawn losing. It's not that losing this pawn is super more valuable than losing that pawn. It's that letting the knight into f5 and letting white have kind of the sustained attack on d6, which is basic. D6 is the weakest pawn for black. It's like permanently backwards and not easily defended. So letting white get into black's position is the problem. You aren't really improving your penetration into white's position here, but black is, but white is, advancing into your position and attacking d6 in a way that's going to require you to defend d6 for like an extended period of time. Yeah, this was rough. I think this was a tactical error. I think you can. I don't know can you play e6 here? No, I guess not. Rook e5 and you're fine. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's take a look at the different things to improve on in this game. Very interesting game, Raymond. Thank you for sending it. It gives an interesting instructive endgame position. Okay, the first difference here is you had this opportunity to open up this king side. I understand like it's dangerous and it's sort of a speculative take of this piece, but usually a queen and a knight is not going to be enough to win. To fully mate. You're opening yourself up to attack, but I think you're fine. I think you can open yourself up to this attack, and it's worthwhile for you. You get the full piece here, and you're going to have to play super accurately. White's going to have to get practical compensation, but White's going to get a lot of practical compensation for that piece that you're winning. But objectively, this was better. With good tactical, with a lot of tactical study, you're going to feel more and more comfortable playing moves like this, just because you can count it out and you can see, okay, well, the attack's not quite there for white, so you're probably okay winning the full piece there. You're not going to get mated. Or you'll have at least more confidence that you're not going to get mated in that type of situation. But this actually works well for black. So that's the first improvement. Going on this, okay, so this is interesting. Rook a1, and basically black is going to get a pretty strong idea here. So basically, rook a6 allows white to get this target on a5 that he's very likely to win. The issue is white can't defend the pawn with b4, otherwise he'll take b4. So a5 is sort of a missed move because it's going to involve it's a situation in which white is going to get a pawn isolated from the rest of his pawns because b4 isn't playable. Okay, and then this win of an exchange, that was good. But this is really the key position. The key position is just don't let white into your territory. There may not be a very fixed, there may not be a very fixed reason here. Like it's not like there's a specific tactical reason to not let white into your territory immediately, but just play king f6 so white doesn't have this advanced posting. In the endgame, spatial advantages become more and more important. So king f6 here, and you'll maintain the full ability to win a5, but you'll remove white's ability to take f5. Just having the knight so far, basically so far into attacking d6 is a problem. This situation is not going to resolve itself either. This a6 hanging, or this a5 hanging pawn is going to be hanging pretty much no matter what. So king f6 defending f5 is the correct move. Don't let the knight into your territory, and this pawn will be available for you later. From this point, the eval has really shifted. Yeah, interesting. So I think the errors here were there were basically two big errors in this game. The first was you had this opportunity to win this piece, but you just needed I guess you sort of need more like confidence in your tactical ability to be able to play bishop takes f3 followed by g5 here. I know it's risky, I know it's dangerous. White will get good practical comp, but with enough tactical study, tons and tons of tactical study, you'll be confident enough to play through this this bishop takes f3 g5 threat. Second opportunity, a5 was a mistake for white, so I think you can win that pawn eventually. And then just the decisive problem here was allowing white's knight to get into black's territory and attack d6. There was no urgency to take a5 here. If you defend f5 with king f6, you'll have a sustained defense on f5, and you will have no problems defending d6. It's about space is the main point. So if you let white get the spatial advantage of a piece in your position, that's going to be a sustained positional disadvantage. So those are the two things I'd focus on, Raymond. Thank you very much for sending the game. Very interesting, instructive endgame position. This is actually a very important concept. Don't let your opponent get into your position in the endgame if you don't have to. And here, first the a5 pawn you could get later, but you could have avoided the white's piece. Basically, the rest of this endgame is determined by white's pieces getting into your position. Like in this position here, white's pieces are in black's position. That could have been headed off with king to f6 and not allowing f5. It's not just a trade; it's a positional improvement for white. that you can prevent with king to f6. Anyways, thank you very much for sending the game, Raymond. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's on to Coach's game, and yeah, let's take a look. Coach always gives very specific layouts of what to look at in the game, so it's really helpful. And let's take a look at the game. So Coach is playing as black here, and he's basically facing off against, I think they call it an open-closed Sicilian, but basically a delayed d4. Now Taimanov variation, and here, you know, I generally like, I generally like black's position. I mean, black's made good efforts to try to equalize this. Bishop c4 is the normal problem. Bishop c4 without f4, f5 resource is misplaced bishop on that diagonal. The bishop, so basically if you look at the differences here, bishop e2 is played 1850 and bishop c4 is played 25. There's a reason why this is the case, and basically if you count out the mobility for this bishop can only go to 2 squares on this diagonal, c4 and b3. If you get the bishop to e2, this bishop can go to many squares on this diagonal, e2 through h5. So, you know, even though it looks like the bishop might be valuable on this more advanced diagonal, its mobility is actually much worse. You know, you can make this worthwhile by playing moves like f4, f5 that'll break open this diagonal eventually, but yeah, bishop c4 frequently has problems in the Sicilian. It's never bad, it's just inefficient. You know, it's not a move that's going to cause you to lose, but it's a move that's going to cause you inefficiencies relative to other moves. So bishop to c4 is an error in many Sicilians. And especially Sicilians in which there's already a pawn on e6, or there's a pawn on e7 and e6 can be played. Queen to c7, d takes c6, queen c takes. Overall here, I think black is, you know, basically white gets an advantage here. Rook to b8 allows threats on this rook and this bishop to develop with momentum. On bishop to b4, or bishop, basically giving white this free developing move is problematic. This pawn doesn't really need to be defended, so rook to b8 is not super efficient. I want to make sure that I fully look at this, what you wrote about this game, though, Coach, because you write these good comments. So you were learning a new opening, and you wanted to, yeah, and you're talking about the tempo that that black gets after rook b8. I think that's a perfect assessment, by the way. Yeah, so I think giving your opponent tempo with rook b8 is not great. Exactly. And then you want to evaluate castling short on move 17. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, really great. Thank you very much for sending that analysis. I can give you exactly the good. Yeah, I think it's really helpful when you write things like that. I can give you an analysis exactly to look at that. I'd read over that comment before, but I didn't really remember it. So now I remember looking at this. Cool. So yeah, rook b8 is a misstep in a new opening. Completely understandable. It happens to all of us. Makes sense. And then okay. And then this attack gets dangerous. So first, probably bishop to f6. But I really want to slow this down. Okay. Interesting. Okay, makes sense. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Well, the first thing is okay, so the tactic that I like here. So the first thing is it's a tactical position is the main point. This is gonna get determined on tactics. The thing about this though is I sort of like actually. I wonder if you can get away with bishop takes h2 here. Not quite. Okay, interesting. Because I was thinking bishop to h2. Yeah, you need a defense of the g7 pawn. Yep. It's basically a hanging pawn, right? So bishop f6 is probably your best bet. No, they don't like that either. Interesting. Yeah, I actually really understand your questions here, Coach. This is an interesting situation. Because yeah, I understand exactly what you're talking about. Things are going to get more dangerous if you castle. Tricky. You know what I sort of like here is actually g6. Let's see if the engine immediately refutes that one. Yeah, I like g6 actually. Because the thing about g6 is you're sort of yeah, I think that's right. I think the issue there is if you play yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's the issue. 17 was the last chance to castle. Yep. Yeah, that seems right. Yeah. You're asking a really good question. When should black castle in this when should black castle in this position? Yeah, let's I sort of want to take it even further back than this. Yeah. Hey, welcome Hyperion. Thanks for joining the stream. Is the queen trade good here? Well, the answer is, in a general sense, yes. There's definitely positions in which keeping your king centered is safer than castling. That seems to happen like pretty. That happens pretty frequently, where it's just dangerous to castle. Things like that happen like when your opponent has already started pawn storming you. You probably don't want to castle into that. But this is really interesting. So first, rook to b8. Rook to b8 is actually kind of problematic for your king safety. It definitely, I mean, I don't know. You probably weren't going to castle queenside here anyways, but... Okay, knight e2, knight takes... Yeah, this is tricky. So yeah, bishop to f6, I guess. Bishop to f6 seems like the best move. Honestly, I think this might be a situation where you should just keep your king in the center. It's a tough one. I'm sort of wondering if there were any missteps that led to white getting such an advanced situation on the king side. But I think from here, uh, with this knight having gotten so advanced, I might just play bishop f6, or like rook takes. So rook takes rook. Um, uh, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, and then bishop to f6 here. So let's sort of, I want to see if there's any real refutation of that, but bishop f6, damn. Castles. Yeah, this position is surprisingly dangerous for black. Yeah, let's take a minute. Let's really take a minute on this. So rook b8 is an error, right? We sort of understand rook b8 is a mistake, and not the best play here. There are other things here that I think are a little bit unusual. I'm wondering if maybe, I think bishop to b4 would head off this problem very early. Having this knight get super advanced. Basically, if you're looking at this position on move, like, 9, these pieces aren't really particularly oriented towards the king side. Overall, black's king safety is going to be worse. Basically, white has the option to castle to either side here, including queen side, and that's going to be pretty good for... I think castling queen side is the correct idea for white, because then white will be able to safely launch an attack on the king side. Knight f6 maybe, bishop b4, but the way that this knight kind of became this, like, basically sort of, I don't know, very active piece was surprising and was a problem. I'm thinking here maybe g6. What happens on g6? Yeah, then black's just sort of slightly worse, but heading off these problems, I don't know. I think that maybe queen takes c6 was wrong. Let's think about this. So, in this, we're still in opening book here. I think d takes c6 is better. Queen to c6 doesn't really help you very much. That's I guess that's a really that's sort of the error. Yeah, no, I think d takes c6 is really a move that causes you some. What's interesting is it's like, in chess you can end up paying for moves way after you make them. So like you make this error, right? And everyone makes errors from time to time, but you can end up paying for those errors in a very costly way later on. And those are often the hardest errors to find, because you're just like, what happened, right? Like, why is this position very quickly going against me? And the reason for that is it can often be because of a move played way before. So yeah, I think that's the difference. I think d takes c6 here is actually like significantly better for black. I guess with queen takes c6, sort of what's your hope here? What is the yeah, but not really. I mean, b takes c6 and a5 maybe, but Yeah, yeah, you can sort of do that too. You can start a queenside expansion. Um, but I'm gonna tie a lot of stuff back to this queen takes move because I think queen takes was an error that's not super obvious. This leads to a much more healthy pawn structure for black, and one in which there's a lot better opportunity for king safety. You know, you end up paying for this way later, but yeah, I think you know, opening up this d file for your rook or your queen is a better idea. Bishop to c5, knight to e7, knight to g6. Yeah, yeah, it does gain. Yeah, so it does prompt a response from white. Um, so there, you know, it's good. It's a good idea. You know, play a move that prompts a response for white. I get it. Um, yeah, yep. But yeah, very interesting situation. To be completely honest. Uh, and yeah, so let's go through this. You know, because it looks like, you know, it feels like that attack, you know, just sort of snuck up on you, right? It's like, you know, okay, so you acknowledge rook b8's a mistake, but what you know, what was better? Um, and then this attack seems to come out of nowhere, basically. But I think the misplacement of your queen was problematic, and it gave your king, and you know, by the time this, you know, by the time this comes around, you're sort of way behind on development for or you're in a lot of trouble as black, and you can't really castle. So yeah, queen takes c6 was an error. And then yeah, and then that ends up leading to the king side getting broken into. So yeah, queen takes c6 causes king safety issues. You know, your threats, yeah. So d takes c6, and I think you've got a much more playable game. In terms of determining when you should castle here, it's a tough question. I think, yeah, probably like move 17 or 18. You know, castling here is probably well, here you have to do something with the bishop, so um, maybe bishop to f6. Maybe not. I don't know. Uh, sure. Yeah, but no. I mean, you know, the thing is, the issues were caused by queen takes c6 as opposed to d takes c6. Your question, like the most straightforward answer to your question of when should I, yeah, no, totally uncomfortable position to play as black. Um, uh, yeah, the question was, um, so obviously missing knight to g7 is a problem. Um, but rook takes, and then either rook takes castles. This leads to a very uncomfortable situation to play as black. But yeah, I would just basically bite the bullet and castle here anyways. I think this should be okay. Not this is a rough position to play as black, um, but on rook takes d1, I think you just have to castle and accept the fact that there's going to be king safety issues. Queen to g4, h6. Yeah, you have the bishop pair. That's an advantage, but yeah, no, you're really so d takes, you know, ended up being much better. I tie most of this back to d takes. A lot of things in this game don't happen if the queen is on this diagonal as opposed to this diagonal. Um, so going back to that is big. Rook b8 was an error, and but I do think you can castle here. I think rook takes castles. You probably just have to bite the bullet and play a tactically resourceful defense. G6 first could be better. I guess G6 here, and you've got, the knight's going to have to move somewhere, and then you can just trade off the bishop and castle. But you're going to end up having to castle kingside in a relatively uncomfortable situation. That's the main point of this game. So yeah. Yeah, interesting situation. Interesting situation, Coach. This is very interesting. Yeah, so queen takes. That's the first improvement. D takes versus queen takes c6, and then you did have some tactical ability to play castling here. Trade off the rooks. And so rook takes, and then play g6. And this is very uncomfortable, but your best option is black. The best tactical defense. When to castle versus when not to castle. Honestly, I think at the end of the day, the biggest determinant of that is a tactical component. Whether or not you can launch a successful tactical defense, I think is really the best idea. But yeah, I think that's it. You should be looking at castling more cautiously if your opponent has started a pawn, a pawn storm or that kind of thing. So that should be a good general guideline. And then late in the game where things are more tactically, conceding the file, the G file, yeah, here. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you don't want to dismiss the rook b8 as a tough move, but I think rook b8 is probably just another thing. Rook b8 sort of slows down your development. When you play rook b8 and then have to follow it up with rook b7, you're closing an important file off, important diagonal off for your bishop. But yeah, super complicated game, really interesting. Yeah, but castling I think was playable after move 17. You can castle here on move 20. Rook takes and then g6 and then castles. Castling was available as an option. I think in what you wrote me, right, the I mean, you're asking a really good question. It's a really hard question. When can you, when can you castle and when can you not castle? This castling was basically this castling was fine here. It's mainly related to how many pieces white had. Usually 2 pieces is not sufficient to checkmate you. So I guess, first, the highest priority, most important assessment, is there a tactical refutation of your castling? That's number 1. Second, yeah, no, I mean, Sicilian is tough. Queen takes c6 is a move that causes some problems. But yeah, I think basically I would go with castling, evaluate castling queenside, evaluate castling kingside against how many pieces and how activated that attack is. 2 active pieces is a problem, but it's probably unlikely to lead to a mate. So that's Yeah, no. I mean, that's the question that I'm trying to answer. It's a tough question. I don't have a great answer for it, but I think the concept is top priority. If you see a tactical refutation of castling, then that should lead you away from it. Second, if you're just sort of eyeballing it and it's a position that's too complicated to castle, then I think counting the pieces is probably the best idea. Two pieces is usually not sufficient. It usually takes three pieces or two pieces and a pawn or something. Um, Not always true, but generally true. And two pieces against one defender, this dark squared bishop, you should probably be okay. So yeah, I would castle and move like 20. I would play g6 and then castle and move 21. That should be all right. Or castle and move 22 here. Should be okay. Yeah, I think that's right. I think the tactics number one, and then quantity of yeah. No, I mean it is right. It's all about coming up with which rules of thumb to apply in which situations, and which situations one component is more important than the other. But yeah, tactics. The thing about the value of tactics is that you're maximizing on situations that don't come to rule of thumb. Basically the top priority in all situations is tactics, right? If it doesn't matter what the fundamentals are if you have a three-move tactic that wins a piece. Like it just doesn't matter. I mean, I think they call them heuristics, right? The heuristics don't matter if you have tactical execution that leads to a decisive victory. So tactics are the highest level determinant of any position. The rest of things, you have to come up with, oh, is it more important to move this piece out, or is it more important to clear out this file? Like that's when you get into a more deep kind of thoughtful discussion. But why tactics are so important is because they trump all other they trump all other concepts. Like the tactical victory offsets any other thing that had been going on in that situation. That leads to positions where one side has played a much more fundamentally correct game than the other, and then they hang a piece, so there's a tactical bust, and then the game is just over. That would be an extreme demonstration of when tactics are more important than everything else. So the most important thing is there a tactical win for your opponent if you castle? That's number one. Number two is how do you make a judgment? And I think the second so basically I think the second most important thing there is it's usually based on number of attackers against number of defenders. I think that's probably the best it, and I can just tell, especially because of experience, that moving basically two pieces against one defender just isn't going to break through that king side in a mating way. It's kind of a rough way to estimate, but yeah, here you have the tactical g6 and you have castles, and you can just see that there's no real advancement for white there. So that's the importance of tactics. They trump everything else. But yeah, interesting situation, and I do think you had opportunities to castle relatively late in this game. It would, the top level assessment is, can you actually calculate things out? The second level assessment is how many attackers versus how many defenders, and then the third level assessment is how many defenders or how many attackers versus how many defenders can be generated later. So if you're, there may only be two pieces now, but if there's an awesome opportunity for a pawn storm later, then you can really capitalize, or then white could really capitalize. But this position where the pawn storm's relatively far away and you have one full defender against two attackers, you're probably going to be fine. So I think that's a way of judging it, and I think as a result you're okay castling kingside here, especially after you've maximized your position, this knight placement by playing g6. Yeah, interesting situation. So let's look at this. So number two, Yeah, and you can get the queen in as well. I mean, there were opportunities for black to improve on that game. But yeah, it's super helpful. It's really easy if you guys give me good good assessments of what you're interested in learning about in a position. I can try to give my best response to it. I'm not always going to be right, but I'll give my best response. Um, but yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, coach. You giving me that ability to, you giving me that analysis is super helpful in knowing what to focus on. I think it's not rook b8 is clearly like not the correct move, and queen takes c6 was worse than d takes c6. But I think conceptually giving me an indication to focus on that position is really helpful. So yeah, thanks for sending that game over, and thanks for sending over the analysis, because it makes I think it makes the analysis much better. Yeah, so it's white's. All right, so this is Houseline's game. Houseline also wrote a good note, so I want to make sure that this is good. Yeah, no problem. No, thanks for sending the game. No, I really appreciate you guys sending in games. Yeah, to look at. It's really helpful, and thank you for participating in the stream. Um, okay. The computer said, all right, so this is another one Houseline sent over. This is about, Houseline's already done a computer advantage. And basically the question is when to break the center. Good question. Okay, so here, this is kind of interesting. So you've played the Alapin, right? But this is actually a situation in which bishop to c4 is actually the correct move. If e5 gets played in a Sicilian, bishop to c4 goes from a not good to play move to a very good to play move. Now bishop to c4, and it has this basically has excellent control of this diagonal. So this is a move. This is a situation in which you would play bishop to c4 in the Sicilian. Really dangerous and strong here. So d4, pawn takes, knight takes, queen takes. This simplifies. I think this is probably worse than bishop to c4. On bishop to c4 here, yeah, I mean, actually, I don't know. But black didn't have to fully simplify. The bad move here for black was trading off this knight on c6 for this knight on d4. Trading off the knight on c6 for the knight on d4 in the Sicilian as black is often an error. It's often an error because then your queen is on d4 and you have nothing to force it off of that square with. And it's not worth, allocating resources to play like b6 or bishop to c5. So here, knight takes d4 is really an error. Knight f6 and the position's equalized, but knight takes d4 and white's up by more than a pawn. So big error for white here. Still, I would play bishop to c4 here. I think bishop to c4 is stronger than d4. If you get the opportunity to play bishop to c4 in the Sicilian, and that happens after e5 is played, then it becomes a great move to play. So anyways, this all simplifies. White's up a lot. This is a big positional advantage. Bishop to c4 wins a pawn here at least. So yeah, bishop to c4, or sorry, bishop to b5 here wins a pawn. So on bishop to b5, you can play, I think bishop to d7 is pretty much forced. And then you play queen takes d5. And I think you're up more than a pawn. The engine is also looking at here, d5 is just an error. Like, why not just take it? I think you can just take it, right? Yeah, just take it for white. So I'm a little confused, to be completely honest. All right, nice. Okay, so white wins a good game. That's good. But there were a lot of opportunities for white that I think were better. So first, pawn takes d5 I think should be a pretty straightforward improvement. Like this is just going to lead to a better situation. Engine's talking about knight to c3. Sure, I guess, but pawn takes e4. Yeah. The engine wants you to play more tactically here. Bishop to d7, and then something like bishop to g5. Cool. Yeah, f6. I don't know. I guess I would just say that white's fine. So yeah, the answer is when to break the center. Here, is fine. Just if you play this, then you're just up a pawn. There's no value in maintaining a center structure if you're just gonna end up better here. Just take the pawn it goes from being a tense center to a not tense center where white is much better and has good center control. So that's my advice on that. So yeah. In terms of advancing this position, you had an interesting situation. So, I don't know. I guess I would say this is generally just a pretty solid win for white. The answer is don't keep center tension if it's not favorable center tension for you. d5 gets played, then you play pawn takes d5, and you're good. This is just better for white. Yeah, just take all the pawns and be fine. I want to see, take a look at this endgame and see if white could have capitalized better. Sort of wondering about that. Like, what are these eval differences from? I guess you can make this pawn structure fall. I guess that's the main improvement here. So here, rook to b7, and then the king goes somewhere, probably to e6, and then you can play. You can basically play knight to c7, and this feels a little slow, but the engine doesn't really care when it wins. So knight to c7 and then knight to b5, and then basically you're getting an excellent attack on this king side. So that was a slight endgame improvement. Overall here, though, let's go through things I would have done differently. Thank you for sending this game, Houseline. Super appreciated, and giving a focused question. When do you break tension in the center? Tough question, but here bishop c4 is a huge improvement. Bishop to c4 goes from being a bad move in the Sicilian because it bites on e6 versus a great move in the Sicilian because it has this open line. So bishop to c4 is definitely highest priority #1 move here. Definitely bishop to c4. Taking this diagonal is great. You have all the benefits of an Italian game and some of the benefits of a Sicilian game. So yeah, so strongly recommend bishop to c4 if black plays e5 in the Sicilian. That's takeaway #1. Here, this pawn is, you can just basically take the pawn. You're going to get more pieces to defend it with. If the queen checks you or does anything difficult like that, you can just play bishop to e3 and develop with a defensive move. But yeah, white's just in very good shape here. There's a few tactical missteps here. Bishop e7, d takes e4 was better. D takes e4 would lead to a neutralization of the center. But yeah, there in terms of relieving the center, there wasn't much center. There was no advantage to not relieving the center. You might as well just take. If the pawn is hanging, then take the hanging pawn. It's, there's no benefit to leaving things complicated. You might as well just make things uncomplicated and winning. So that's my improvement there. And yeah. It doesn't matter, to be completely honest. I think you can take with either. But probably the pawn. Depends a little bit on the tactics of the situation. I guess, I don't know. Alright, so the engine says knight takes d5 is better. Either one. But there's no advantage in leaving the tension on the board. I would play e takes d5. I like e takes d5 because it gets you this open file, but I guess that open file is a little bit superficial because the king can just castle out of it. Knight takes d5 instead. Sure. It doesn't really matter, though. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's better. I think, honestly, the knight takes d5 is a better play, and white's going to end up better after knight takes d5. Either one. But the question that that Houseline was asking is, when to relieve the tension in the center. You should just relieve it you should just relieve it whenever you relieve it. Just basically, hold this, one pawn as best you can, and be happy with the one pawn advantage as white, even if it's an isolated queen's pawn. Still better for white. Then it trades off into a relatively equal game. And then white gets better penetration into the black position early. And, yeah. And basically threats, white should, not trade off here. Basically white, it's kind of a weird position, but leaving the pieces on to attack. So this is an interesting position where you have two opposing heuristics, right? You have basically the principle that says if you're up material, then trade off pieces, right? So that's heuristic number one. But then you have heuristic number two, which is if you're attacking, don't trade off pieces because you need pieces to attack your opponent with. And this actually falls into the category where the second one, white attacking these pawns on the king side, is the more important heuristic. So here, even though you have two basically opposing concepts at play, and the more important one is actually leave the attack on by keeping your pieces on. Counterintuitive. I know that's counterintuitive, but it's actually very interesting. It's very interesting how that how those two opposing things are going on in this position. But this is and usually the first of those two heuristics is more important, but this is a rare case in which the second of those two heuristics is more important. So interesting. White wins anyways. Awesome, good stuff. White did a good job, almost flagging his opponent. But yeah, just front to back improvements. Play bishop c4. Bishop c4, unlike a normal Sicilian position, after e5, bishop c4 really takes great control of this diagonal. And then bishop b5, okay, sure. And then this pawn was hanging, so takeaway number two, definitely, don't worry about the concept of tension in the center. If you can win a pawn, you can win a pawn, so just do that, and the central gets neutralized, but you're better. And then, yeah, white's just doing fine. And yeah, the misplay here is you actually have a surprisingly strong attack on the king side. So as a position where you have an active attack, keep the pieces on so you can attack your opponent. Determining that white has an active attack here is a little bit complicated. You can kind of focus on the weakness of this g7 pawn and the exposedness of this g7 pawn, but those are the two factors that are at play in this position. Keeping pieces on because you're attacking versus removing pieces because you're up material, and keeping pieces on because you are attacking is the more important of those two in this particular case, and that's unusual. It's usually the other way around, is the more important. So anyways, that's what's going on here. That's why you should have kept the pieces on. But makes sense. I mean, it's tough, really tough position to assess because you have those two things going in opposite directions, and the less common of the two is actually the one that's the more important in that particular situation. Interesting. Thank you very much for sending that game house line. I really appreciate it, and yeah, I hope that was helpful. And your question, the focus question that you gave me, when to relieve the tension, feel free to relieve the tension at the moment that it's the most advantageous to you. And in this particular case, you would win a full pawn, so that's good stuff. Basically good way to do it. Okay, weird. All right, c5. Basically center counter game with c5. I haven't seen much of that. It's not even on the list. 1,000 games and c5 is not one of them. It would probably fail the criteria, because queen to e5, and then on bishop e7, then queen takes f g7. On queen to e7, then queen takes e7, I guess. And then just white ends up with a better pawn structure, and black ends up with a bad d pawn. Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. Interesting game, Samsters Ronnie. But c5 I think would fail to our normal opening criteria test. Our opening criteria test, and I'm getting more and more comfortable using it, is if the move that you play in an opening is more than 0.5 pawns worse than your best opening according to the engine. So here it's about 2.25 pawns worse, and it's played less than 1% of the time, then you probably shouldn't be playing it. And here it had never been played, so it's just a move that black should not play. Queen to d3 makes sense. This sort of transposes into that Scandinavian we were talking about earlier. It's all sort of good, but white's good here, basically. Black played a move that allows white to develop very quickly and safely. White's looking good. And yeah, overall smooth win for white. Great game, Sam Sajwani. A good looking win. The most important, and so center game is interesting. Not an opening that I know extremely well. I guess I would say that you probably shouldn't play it, to be honest. Openings that equalize for black this early just aren't that objectively good. But if you're very comfortable with it, then you can keep playing it. But it's like it shifts the eval almost half a point away from you. So I've got some question. If it's a fun opening for you to play, then play it. But from an objective basis, there are stronger openings out there. Knight f3 is fine. But c5 is really a rough play for black. I don't think that's a good idea at all. I think he should take that out of his opening repertoire. This all makes sense. I don't really think that this is super great idea. I think I would probably just play. I mean, the engine's saying d7, but I would just play knight takes d7 and sort of end all this stuff. This looks fine. Yeah, white wins. Nice. So in terms of going through systematically, center counter game is kind of a hey, thank you very much for the follow, 21. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. But yeah, so basically here, center counter game is kind of a questionable general opening. It's usually not played at grandmaster level. If it's fun for you to play, then go ahead and play it. But it's not. I don't think it's objectively particularly strong. c5 is an error. It failed the opening criteria test that we put out. Queen d3 is probably the best move. This looks a little bit like that Scandinavian that we were talking about earlier too. Just send a game. Yeah, just feel free to send a game, and the Discord is here. Yeah, or feel free. Yeah. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, definitely don't submit if you're like, definitely don't submit if you're not interested in seeing the game. Any game works. Uh, yeah, never submit a game that you're uncomfortable with, and just feel no pressure. Whatever you're most comfortable with. If you also want to send a game that's or you can send a game idea, or like a lesson idea, that totally works. But yeah, just really never submit a game that you don't want seen, or whatever, or never feel any pressure. It's all good. It's all good with me. Um, so anyways, thanks very much yeah, thanks for being here. But yeah, feel free to send whatever you like, send as much as you like, but also feel no pressure. That's my main point. Um, so queen takes d4, center counter gambit. I don't know if that's really it's up to you. White makes some missteps here, and then wins cleanly in the end. Good game. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sending that game, Sam Sejwani, and please keep sending them. The things that I would say about this, cool. Yeah, thanks, Slimestone. I've added that for May 22nd at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks. No, that works too. I mean, whatever. I don't feel that strongly. No, it's all right. I've already added it. I added. True. We do have a queue. But if I basically will, I'll add it for, if I see it, I'll add it. Just confirming, that'll be 10 a.m. Eastern on May 22nd. So yeah. So center counter game, not particularly good. And then I think there's just some tactical volatility. So Sam Sejwani, my advice to you, I think stick with the tactics routine. The tactics routine is good for you. Basically, if you keep doing tactics, you'll improve quickly. Did take an hour a day to do like puzzle battle, puzzle rush, whatever you most like, but really put the time in. That's where you can improve the most quickly as someone who's rated 900. If you want to go from 900 to 1500, I think you can do that almost purely with tactical study. So that's my advice for you on that topic. Overall, I think it's time to wrap up. Went a little bit over today. Thanks everyone very much for sending the games. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time, and thank you for being here on the stream. And feel free to send as many games as you like, whatever you're interested in having looked at, and really just generally appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for the time, and I will see you later. Thanks, bye. What's up? Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, no problem. What's your username? Expired Choco. Let's take a look. We can look. Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's on the May 20th schedule I have is not that. Yeah, let's figure it out. Let's take a look. Uh, hmm. Oh yeah. Sorry. That was the second game we looked at. No, thank you for raising that. We looked at that. That was the second one we looked at today. Sorry about that, Choco. But yeah, we looked at that that 1 second. So you can just pull that on. You can pull that from the. I'll just end the stream, and it'll be the second one on the. Oh yeah, no worries at all. But yeah, it's the second one on the stream, and I'll just close this, and you can watch the video on demand. But yeah, no, thanks for that. But it shouldn't be with the schedule. I think it should be good. Yep. Yeah, it was on there. Yeah, no problem. No, thanks guys for sending it, and no problem at all. Thanks for being here. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap up. Thanks all for being here, and yeah, look forward to seeing you. Next stream is at 6:05 p.m. Eastern tonight. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.